Portland's classrooms are still in crisis.
Teachers have been hurt, kids have been hurt. I've seen kids savagely beaten in the hallway.
Teachers say they're overwhelmed, dealing with violent outbursts from students.
Is that it's exhausting to use our planning time that we have so little of to document behaviors and student incidents that don't get followed up on.
And almost a week after Oregon's primary election, Clackamas County is still counting tens of thousands of ballots, leaving a number of races in limbo. Now, the county clerk is facing calls to resign. And this is not the first time she's been criticized for how she's handled elections. Here's The Story.
I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. All the ways to communicate with us right there at the bottom of your screen. You can email us. The address is thestory@kgw.com. Or you can use the hashtag TheStoryKGW on Twitter, or leave us a voicemail. Call our phone number, 503-226-5090. We're going to start tonight with the vote mess in Clackamas County. As of this morning, the county reported receiving 113,000 ballots back from voters, which is great. But if the error rate holds of roughly 64% not being able to be read by the tally machines, workers will have to hand copy more than 70,000 ballots and then feed those new ballots through the machines again. It's unclear exactly how long that would take. This is video of election workers today. Roughly 64% of the ballots have barcode problems and the tally machines can't read them. So those ballots have to be copied onto new ballots by hand, and then the new ballots run through the machines. The duplication effort was put on hold at the end of Wednesday and then started up again this morning at 7 a.m. Groups of workers were duplicating ballots from 7 until noon, taking a break, and then going back at it from 1 o'clock until 1 minute ago, 6 p.m. We expect that they'll be back at it again tomorrow. We're still waiting to hear how many were counted today and how many were duplicated. Now, when we talk about voting on this show, we sometimes urge you to pay attention to the candidates for the smaller offices, and we don't always shake our finger. But pay attention to the smaller offices like, well, the election clerk who runs the elections. In this case, her name is Sherry Hall. Let's get to know her a little bit. Hall is a Republican and was elected to the nonpartisan county clerk position in 2002. She was reelected in 2006, then again in 2010 and 2014 and 2018. And this fall, she's up for election again. The primary this year is not the first time she's found herself in the headlines, by the way. Back in 2004, Hall learned about an error in hundreds of ballots and didn't tell the public about it. Then in 2010, another major printing error. She had to send corrected information to voters because the voters' pamphlets were wrong. And she also mistakenly put two races on the May ballot that were supposed to go on the November ballot, so it was way too early. That mistake cost the county $120,000 to reprint hundreds of thousands of ballots. The very next year, she accepted signatures that were invalid to place an urban renewal initiative on the ballot. And the year after that, in 2012, a part-time county election worker was accused of tampering with two ballots to cast additional votes for Republicans. The Oregon Department of Justice stepped in to investigate that one. The worker eventually pled guilty. Hall was not implicated. Despite recall efforts, Hall was reelected in 2014, beating out four other candidates. In 2018, Hall made headlines again for sending out voter information with her own name prominently displayed all over it while she was running for re-election. Now, it's not illegal to do that as the elections clerk in Oregon, but it is in other states, and several voters filed complaints.
Well, it gives her an unfair advantage. I think it's very difficult for any challenger to overcome that. It's all name recognition, you know, for a minor office like that.
In that case, Sherry Hall said she was only doing what she and other county clerks have always done.
Most elected county clerks put that information on the ballot envelope and the inserts because people that get the information need to know where it came from.
Throughout the past week, we've heard from a lot of you in Clackamas County and outside of it as well about Sherry Hall's history. Chet said Sherry Hall's been screwing up in Clackamas County for years. In the past, she's proved she's both partisan and incompetent. Now she's making the county a laughingstock again. If she had any shame, she would resign and let smart people do this job. And Deborah added, I am a Clackamas County resident and voter dissatisfied with Sherry Hall. She needs to go. Well, the Oregonian newspaper agreed. Over the weekend, they published an editorial calling for Hall to resign, writing in part, Diligence and attention to detail are critical for maintaining both the integrity of our elections and the trust of voters. Unfortunately, Hall's sloppy performance reflects either a lack of competence or a lack of concern. Neither is acceptable. Now, you could argue that we're holding a magnifying glass to Hall's time in office and that things happen everywhere. Okay, but when was the last time you heard about issues with Washington County elections or Multnomah County elections? Yeah, you haven't. So it's not surprising that the largest newspaper in Oregon called on Hall to resign, to walk away from the office right now. But as an elected official, Hall cannot be fired by anyone other than voters in November. To resign, she would step down voluntarily and give up her job, which pays $112,000 a year. And by the way, she's given no public indication that she will step down. So, what do you think? This is your chance to participate. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. Should Sherry Hall resign? Has she shown such a lack of competence that it's time to go and make way for someone else? Or is this just an unfortunate set of mistakes and maybe we in the media are making it worse than it actually is? Well, send me an email. Let me know what you think. Send it to thestory@kgw.com or call our phone number and leave a message, 503-226-5090. This week, by the way, KGW is launching a brand new true crime podcast called It Should Be Alive. It examines the 2019 murder of a Vancouver teenager named Nikki Kuhnhausen. Ashley Korslund is the host and producer of the podcast and spent the last year researching this case. Here's a preview.
Yeah, she wanted to go to Hollywood. She wanted to be a star.
17-year-old Nikki Kuhnhausen was magnetic, full of personality. She loved making videos on TikTok and wanted to be a makeup artist to the stars one day.
She wanted to graduate from high school. She wanted to do a lot of stuff. She had plans and dreams.
But her young life was cut short in 2019. Nikki had gone out for a walk in Vancouver late in the night on June 5th. She met a 25-year-old construction worker named David Bogdanov. They exchanged Snapchat accounts, then parted ways. But hours later, the two communicated on Snapchat and arranged to meet back up. Investigators say during a sexual encounter, David discovered Nikki was transgender. He strangled her to death with a cell phone charging cord, then drove to Larch Mountain in East Clark County and dumped Nikki's body off a Forest Service road. For months, Nikki's friends and loved ones had no idea what had happened to her.
I knew something was wrong, and it turns out something was wrong.
Knowing that a trans teenager and a trans female teenager was missing, those stories don't usually end very well.
Then, in December of 2019, 6 months after Nikki disappeared, human remains were discovered on Larch Mountain.
Very quickly it was obvious that yes, we had a human body out here, or remains of a human body. We called the medical examiner.
Officials determined the remains belonged to Nikki Kuhnhausen, and detectives notified her family.
And I just fell to my knees, and the next thing I know, he was holding me, rocking me, saying how sorry he was.
During the investigation, search warrants revealed David's phone pinged in the same area Nikki's remains were found the morning she went missing.
We attempted contact with him yesterday, and he declined to give any further statements. At that point, he was arrested for second-degree murder.
So I understand that you're being arrested today for the murder of Nikki Kuhnhausen.
Prosecutors charged David with second-degree murder and malicious harassment, Washington's hate crime charge. During trial, they argued David killed Nikki when he discovered she was transgender.
He was very angry that she was trans, and he was very upset, and that's why he did it.
But when David took the stand, he claimed self-defense, saying Nikki reached for his gun during a struggle in his car, and that he had no choice but to strangle the teenager with the phone cord.
And all I can think is, oh my God, I'm going to get shot right now.
Was it your intention to hurt Nikki?
Never.
Okay. So you believe that she would have killed you, no doubt?
Yes.
In the end, the jury didn't buy his story. They convicted David on both charges.
We, the jury, find the above-named defendant guilty of the crime of murder in the second degree.
The judge sentenced him to nearly 20 years in prison for the murder. Justice for Nikki's family, but not enough to make up for their loss.
She was full of life, and that was taken from us.
Wow, Ashley, that is a powerful story. And I know one of the interesting and fascinating things that we get to experience as reporters is we're in the courtroom, we hear all the testimony and read all the reports, but there's no time to put that into a TV news story. And I think one of the great things about your podcast is that you're able to expand that a little more. Tell us what you have in store for the listeners.
Yeah, you know, Pat, some of our episodes, we have 6 of them. Some of them are roughly an hour long. So if you can imagine the breadth and the depth that we get to go into this story. And you're absolutely right. When we do stories on TV, we have to boil things down to just a couple minutes. And so in this sort of a platform, we get to really showcase a lot of the investigation. We get to really dive into Nikki's life and learn more about who she was. But we have hours upon hours of police interviews that we listened through, thousands of pages of documents. We did hours upon hours of interviews with Nikki's loved ones and family members and investigators. So you really do get to do a deep dive into this one case and learn how investigators really solved it.
And then I also know that you were able to talk to a juror and find out what was going on behind closed doors.
Yeah, in my experience, it's been very rare to ever get the chance to talk one-on-one with a juror, especially in a high-profile murder case such as this one. And so the juror was really fascinating. She gave us a really compelling interview of what was happening in real time as the trial went on. She talked about being back in the jury room with her fellow jurors and how they were sort of role-playing how the suspect in this case claimed the struggle in the car happened, how he says things happened and how Nikki died, and ultimately how the jury came to the determination of the guilty verdicts in this case. So that was a really compelling interview, Pat.
Yeah, it does sound fascinating. I think we all look forward to listening to your podcast. Thank you,
Pat.
Ashley. The trailer for Should Be Alive is available now wherever you get your podcasts. Episode 1 comes out on Wednesday, and we will release a new episode each week. For this week's Hey Help campaign, we're asking you to donate to PFLAG Southwest Washington. They're an advocacy group for LGBTQ people and their families and friends. They hold monthly support meetings and offer educational programs and other resources. If you want to help, just hold up your phone's camera to the QR code there on your screen, or you can go to kgw.com/heyhelp. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Keep the emails and phone calls coming. A lot of you have telling us you're fired up about Sherry Hall, the elections clerk in Clackamas. Keep sending your questions and comments to thestory@kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail 503-226-5090. Let's talk for a moment about education and behavioral problems in Portland schools. Numbers we found today seem to show a dramatic drop in the number of reported problems in the Portland School District, down by roughly 1,000 from 2,600 incidents in the 2019-2020 school year to just 1,600 in the most recent years. Now, it seems like a tremendous improvement, but maybe it's not. Our Christine Pitawanich talked with teachers on the front lines and found it might not be that at all, that it might be many have given up on actually filing reports of problems.
Sure. My name is Colin Hawkins. I teach science at Roseway Heights Middle School.
Colin Hawkins and his colleagues at Roseway Heights Middle School have seen a lot this year after starting things off with a brawl and walkout. Student behavior and outbursts are issues educators deal with on a near daily basis.
The behaviors we're seeing are violent to a level that I haven't seen in years past, in Portland at least. Teachers have been hurt, kids have been hurt. I've seen kids savagely beaten in the hallway. Kids will go and solve things at a park nearby.
And Hawkins says recently he started seeing a growing sense of vigilantism among students.
Students are trying to police behaviors on their own, which is not good. We had some students who pushed into a classroom because they were trying to defend a friend of theirs who had had some other students bullying her.
Outbursts and violence in the classroom had already been trending up before the pandemic. These photos from KGW's Classroom in Crisis series in the 2018-2019 school year. But as many educators have said, the pandemic made things worse. Special educators are feeling the brunt of it too.
Nathan and I have both been injured by students this year. Quite a few times, but each of us once in a way that required medical attention. And that's becoming more and more common.
Mary Darren is a speech-language pathologist, and Nathan Earle is a licensed clinical social worker. Both work with special education students.
So we're seeing hitting, kicking, spitting a lot more this year than ever before. Near daily, I would say, that a staff member comes away with some kind of physical manifestation of their day at work.
Throughout the year, educators have said a lot of the violence is happening at the middle school level. We asked the district for some numbers, and as of February 28th, it appears the incidents of fights and physical aggression across the district were lower than the same period for previous years. But the teachers union says numbers don't tell the whole story. Documenting can be time-consuming and futile.
But I know that is something we frequently hear from educators. How many times do I document the same thing and get no response before I stop using my time that way?
It's exhausting to use our planning time that we have so little of to document behaviors and student incidents that don't get followed up on.
Educators say it could be a backlog in processing documentation, or two different reporting systems may also be to blame for the discrepancy. But one thing is clear. They all say students are experiencing more need than ever.
Over 225 suicide screenings in quarter one, compared to 91 in quarter one of 2019.
Administrators at the district level say they know the need is high.
Some of our data is showing that there are less referrals this year, but our students are demonstrating more overt behaviors, such as running out of the classroom in elementary, fighting, or substance use issues in our secondary.
Brenda Martnick is the Chief of Student Support Services for Portland Public Schools.
We do have additional staff that are out there working in our classrooms, helping specific teachers, helping to identify and then support the behaviors with some plans.
And she says the nationwide staff shortage doesn't help efforts to fill positions in special ed classrooms and elsewhere. But money from the state allowed the district to put more counselors, social workers, and other mental health providers in schools. Martnick says a new commitment to a policy around discipline is also more supportive and less punitive in nature.
Although we do actually in restorative justice, we do have circles and we talk about the harm that's been caused. and each person gets a chance to open up and really talk about that.
But teachers like Hawkins aren't convinced the discipline system is working.
But what they'll tell the community is we're doing things like restorative justice. We're doing things like having a study hall room where there's somebody working with your kids.
He says the room meant for students to talk about and work through issues isn't staffed. What Hawkins and other educators say it comes down to is more adults or fewer kids per classroom to make sure kids' needs are met.
When you have 30 kids in a classroom, all with highly disparate need levels, the decisions become more of triage and less of like a positive educational plan.
Martnick says the district is trying to help.
And what I want them to know is that we see them, we hear them, we are trying our hardest to try and provide those supports to them. I don't want to give excuses about the staff shortage, but it is real, and I applaud them for their work. It's just a really, really tough time right now.
In early May, the teachers union said data from the district indicated 26 fewer licensed special education staff in classrooms next year if the proposed budget is approved. A Portland Public Schools spokesperson says that number is now down to 5 fewer full-time special education staff. The school board is scheduled to vote on approving the budget tomorrow night, with a second and final approval vote in June. I'm told between now and then, the budget could continue to change. Christine Pitawanich, KGW News.
Thank you, Christine. Still ahead, sometimes you have to look to the past to understand the president. That's why an Oregon researcher is looking back at the 1918 pandemic to get a better idea of how long we'll have to worry about COVID when the story continues. Well, bad news on the COVID front. The number of cases continue to go up in our area. The positivity rate is above 12%. Health experts say 5% is when they start to relax just a little bit. Now, like me, you might be thinking, when in the world is this going to end? One way to get a look at the future is by studying the past, specifically the 1918 flu pandemic. Tim Gordon spoke with a professor at Oregon State University who's looking at parallels between what's happening now and what happened back then.
For more than 2 years, our lives have been changed by a worldwide pandemic. Now, U.S. officials are suggesting a big surge of COVID-19 could infect 100 million Americans this coming fall and winter. That's hard news to hear, but it's not surprising for people who've studied the 1918 flu pandemic. Experts just published an article comparing that outbreak to our current pandemic to answer a critical question.
Which is, how do pandemics end? Do they ever end? And what are the aftermath or aftermaths of a pandemic? Can we see that historically? What might we be able to expect, or what kinds of questions should we be asking ourselves?
Christopher McKnight-Nichols is the director of OSU's Center for Humanities and a history professor. He, along with other experts, see many similarities between the influenza pandemic of the past and our current COVID crisis. First, that both diseases will very likely live on and take lives.
So, short answer is no, pandemic isn't over. And the long answer is the same thing with the flu. The flu's still with us, right? 100 plus years later. COVID will probably still be with us in 100 years.
Nichols knows that after 2+ years, COVID fatigue is real and understandable. But he is concerned that, like in the early 1900s, people ignoring the facts and deciding it's over will make us less safe.
So one of the things you see in the historical record is mayors and public health officials hoping the pandemic is over and yanking off measures, even when they didn't have vaccines and other things. And then you have much higher surges, a second peak that's worse.
Some of the methods of fighting disease haven't changed much. In 1918, they used quarantines, similar hygiene practices, and what we call social distancing today. But there are differences between now and then, when efforts to develop effective vaccines did not work. That's not the case today. Modern medicine and public health infrastructure is much better. But Nichols says the science still isn't the final decider.
From my perspective as a historian, the ending of a pandemic is political or psychological. It isn't biological or epidemiological. And that's something that we could get across to people almost regardless of their politics.
So learning from the past is, in essence, realizing it's up to us to responsibly deal with a disease that will be with us at some level for a very long time.
We need to figure out how to take on board those lessons and make better judgments moving forward, which may mean restricting our lives a bit. And I think we need to be comfortable with that.
Tim Gordon, KGW News.
Thank you, Tim. Keep sending your questions and comments to the story at kgw.com. We'll hear a bit of good news right after this. Let's wrap things up with a bit of good news, our occasional check-in with folks that we meet on the street. Here's Joe Grant, feeling optimistic.
Well, things are starting to get a little bit more back to normal, so it's just a good day. And there's a lot of positivity in the city right now, I think. So if you look for positivity, you will find it. If you look for the negative, that's what you'll see.
Ooh, I like that philosophy. I think that's true. Hey, that's the end of our program. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks for being here. Remember the story, our story? Well, that never ends. I'll see you tomorrow night.